Now let's turn to talking about a monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition, as the name implies, kind of exists in this halfway world where it combines certain elements from a monopolistic market, but also certain elements from a more competitive market. So let's get into that. Really, let's deal with this by breaking it down. First, let's consider the monopoly in a monopolistically competitive market. Monopolistic competitors sell differentiated products. Here we have in mind virtually anything where you can think of multiple brand names. Clothing would be a great example of this, as would things like, I would generally say things like laundry detergent, toothpaste, and the like, are generally monopolistically competitive. There are lots of different brands out there where the products all serve a similar purpose, but they are still somewhat different. So in a sense, we could say that each of these monopolistic competitors has a monopoly in their own brand. One of my favorites, Colgate toothpaste. I love Colgate toothpaste, and it's obviously far better than any of the other types of toothpaste out there. Right, so in a sense, Colgate does have a monopoly in Colgate toothpaste. But at the same time, they have lots of competitors out there producing a similar but not quite the same product. Now, because Colgate is a little bit different than other types of toothpaste, we're going to experience downward sloping firm level demand for Colgate. That means if Colgate decreases its price a bit, it can win over customers that are using other brands. At the same time, Colgate can get away with increasing its price somewhat without losing all of its customers. Now, naturally, it will lose some to competitors, but it's not going to lose all of them, and that distinguishes it from pure competition. Instead, it feels a lot more like a standard monopoly, where the higher the price, the fewer customers you have, the lower the price, the more customers you have. That's certainly going to be true for a monopolistic competitor. So, that's a great result. In terms of demand, it looks just like a monopoly, which means marginal revenue looks just like a monopoly, which means marginal cost, it looks just like a monopoly, which means all the choices that the monopolistic competitor makes will look just like a monopoly. It will follow the same pricing and quantity decision-making rules. So we have the output rule, choose the quantity such that marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, as long as we can stay above the shutdown point with the price we're charging. The pricing rule, choose the price to sell that quantity from the output rule, right, using the demand curve. So when we look at, say, you look at a graph for a monopolistic competitor, it looks just like a graph for a monopoly in the short run, in terms of the decisions it makes regarding quantity and price. Now let's turn to the more competitive side of it. What is it that makes monopolistic competition in any way competitive? Well, the key is that monopolistic competitors experience free entry and exit. What that means is that in the long run, very much like with perfect competitors, they're going to end up with zero profits. So if we have, say, a very profitable business, then lots of competitors are going to rush in producing similar but not quite the same product. That'll be enough to draw away some of the people that were buying the original product, decreasing demand for their product, pushing down the price they can charge until those profits vanish. This is, in fact, is almost exactly the same story we'd use for the perfect competitor for the price taker. Except there we use the story of an increase in supply for the good. Here we're talking about a decrease in demand for a particular brand for the good. But really it's a very similar story. Now, one important point here is that the break-even point is not nearly as meaningful here as it is for a perfect competitor, for very technical reasons. If you draw it out, I think you can probably see, try to draw a demand curve and then an average total cost curve so that they just barely touch each other. And that will give you an idea of, in the long run, how this is going to look. And the point you'll notice is that we don't touch the average total cost curve at the bottom of it anymore. Instead, we'll touch it somewhere along the side as the average total cost curve is still downward sloping, which means the break-even point really isn't particularly informative. We're actually going to break even at a somewhat higher price than we would in a perfectly competitive market, simply because the demand curve is shaped differently. This then leads to a question, right? Is monopolistic competition really a problem? After all, it does have monopolistic in it, and we don't really like monopolies. We know that monopolies can breed certain types of inefficiency that we've discussed before. And then we have the problem that monopolistic competition is probably actually the most realistic model for most markets that consumers deal in. After all, the grand majority of products that I buy are a little bit different from a lot of substitutes, but at the same time, there are lots of substitutes out there, and it's not that hard for other people to start producing more substitutes. Anyone who wants to produce t-shirts can start producing t-shirts without too much difficulty. So, that feels very monopolistically competitive. Lots of different brands, slightly different products, so there's going to be monopoly power because you have a monopoly in your own brand. At the same time, it's relatively easy to enter, so we have something close to free entry and exit in most markets. And these markets are going to look very much like monopolies in terms of the decision they're making regarding price and quantity. But that being the case, if it acts like a monopoly, it's not going to produce at the social optimum. We know that monopolies produce inefficiently. They underproduce to keep their prices up. Right? So does that then imply that we have massive inefficiencies happening in most markets that you and I as consumers would deal in? This naturally may be a great cause for concern. So let's think about that. Well, the answer, as we think about it, is well, yes and no. These inefficiencies, they are very real. Right? That is, the monopoly problem may be very real in these markets. But at the same time, they are limited by the fact that there are very close substitutes available. Now, while it is technically true that maybe Colgate does underproduce Colgate a little bit to keep the price of Colgate a little bit higher than it would otherwise be, at the same time, they can't do this too much, or people are just going to start switching to other brands. Right? People start buying Aquafresh and Colgate. People switch from Colgate to things like Crest, right? Aquafresh, what have you. So they are very limited in their ability to take advantage of their monopoly power simply by the fact that there are lots of other brands out there that are very similar, even if they're not quite the same. Right? At the same time, while there is a monopoly problem, odds are it's probably pretty small, and at the same time, there's actually an offsetting gain. And that is, in a monopolistically competitive market, we have variety. This makes it very unique compared to the other markets we've discussed. For example, with perfect competition, one of the underlying assumptions, one of the reasons that we have price-taking behavior, is that the goods are all identical. It doesn't matter who produces it. It is, as far as the consumer is concerned, exactly the same good. Well, in that case, there is no variety. There are just a lot of different people producing the same thing, so no variety at all in the minds of the consumer. Similarly, with a monopoly, there's only one producer producing the good, so there will naturally then be no variety. With monopolistic competition, this is different, because we have lots of different products out there, each of them slightly different than the others. This then allows for some variety. Now, whether variety is, on the whole, a big enough gain to offset some of these inefficiencies caused by the monopoly problem is really up to you. Some people are big fans of standardization, say no, variety is actually not a good thing on the whole. We'd rather everything be standardized, and let's get rid of monopolistic competition. Let's make everybody produce exactly the same thing, make it perfectly competitive. I think that is not the majority view. Most of us actually like the fact that there is some variety. I especially see this when, say, comparing my wife and I. I'm one where I don't hate variety, but I don't really need it in my life. I'm perfectly content eating vanilla ice cream all the time. That's fine, doesn't bother me. But my wife assures me that it's a good thing that there is Rocky Road as an option as well. That is, that variety is actually a good thing. So when we look at monopolistic competition, we need to keep in mind that yes, there may be inefficiencies arising from some of the monopoly power that monopolistic competitors have, but at the same time there's an offsetting gain, and that now there's a variety available, allowing consumers to choose things that more closely fit their needs. While it is true I can, for example, brush my teeth using Crest, I can't do so and get quite the same flavor that I like as I can if I use Colgate. So this variety does allow for a greater amount of customization in the goods that I purchase for myself. And that is something that most consumers would say is a good thing.